Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final DLH Writers Panel for 2021. And I'm really excited about this one. We are having a conversation with writers and producers from The Resident. With us is Joy Blake, a writer and co-executive producer on The Resident on Fox. She crafted this season's episode, The Long and Winding Road, which is really going to be the focus of our conversation today. Joy has also written on Next, Ghost Whisperer, Outlander, Criminal Minds, Heroes, and many of our favorite shows. Also joining us is Dr. Daniela Lamas, writer and producer and doctor, who works with The Resident to assure the medical accuracy of storylines. So we're going to talk to her about how she balances storytelling and medical accuracy. Thank you both ladies for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So Joy, I have to start, it is very rare to have this scenario where you have a main character, a beloved character, probably everyone's favorite character of a main medical drama or any show, main show. And then you have to find a way for that character to exit and transition out believably, realistically, and with a lot of dignity and honor. So I'm sure that there were a lot of conversations in the writer's room about how to have her exit the show. What made you guys decide that Nick would become an organ donor? And were you thinking about how fans were going to react to that decision?
Well, this was my first season on the show. So it was kind of intimidating to come on board and start, a lot of the conversations about the actresses leaving the show had happened before I got there. So to come on and start talking generally in the room, okay, maybe her character will be in this episode, maybe we'll exit her in this one. And then all of a sudden I was assigned the one where she's gonna die, was like, oh no. So I think I mostly started with the fans in mind, knowing that I was the new person here and this was somebody everybody loved and it needed to be handled really well. We talked a lot about what a funeral episode would look like. And what we kept coming back around to is that the people in the hospital and their unique way of saying goodbye would be sort of the height of how you could say farewell to that character. A regular funeral kind of outside of the hospital just wouldn't carry that same weight. So we sort of started from there and realizing that would be the most satisfying chance, is to give all of those acts of an episode of television to saying goodbye to this character. And that kind of got us to the place of how do we sustain, something has happened to this character and how do we slowly realize what that reality is and say goodbye to her. And that's kind of where the idea for her becoming an organ donor came from.
Yeah, and organ donation is, I always tell people, the thing about organ donors is they're perfectly healthy. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's something that happens. It's a traumatic event that happens so quickly that you're literally saying, okay, see you for dinner. And the next moment you're in the ICU and all of this stuff is happening. So again, I'm guessing organ donation lent itself to, there didn't have to be anything medically, congenitally wrong with Nick.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that I sort of gravitated toward when I learned this early on is that not everybody is going to be able to be an organ donor, right? There are very exact circumstances under which that's possible. And so once we had that piece of the puzzle, laying out the medical to support that became very important to get that right. And to just say, what happened to her was very sudden, very unexpected, but happened in such a way that this gift is now still possible.
That's amazing. Yeah, I always throw out the statistic, less than 1% of people die in a manner conducive to organ donation, because it has to be a head trauma and you have to have all of these other criteria in place. So, that rareness of the gift, I think made it very special for Nick as well. Daniela, you're a writer, producer, and a physician. So talk about how the role that you play in the writer's room as a doctor, as a physician, and how you balance that medical accuracy, wanting to get the information right, and the drama of storytelling, which really is the goal and role of Hollywood, and The Resident does so well.
Sure. I mean, I feel like Joy could probably tell you better than I can how I actually do that. I don't actually know how successful it is or not, but how I intend to do that. I think it's all sort of a work in progress, and it's different depending on different situations. I think the role of a physician in a medical TV drama's writer's room is to both sort of bring those like kind of real life bits of detail that sort of distinguish the actual show from like a show that's fully a conception of somebody who knows of hospitals and maybe has intersected with them, but hasn't sort of truly lived in the world of our characters who are, doctors and nurses. So to pitch stories and sort of medical stories that meet the needs of the drama, and perhaps sort of bring, bits of detail that kind of fit in places. And then sort of just the practical work of like making sure that, dialogue about surgeries are accurate and these sorts of things. I think the bigger questions are, I think this episode is a great example of the bigger questions of kind of what matters to get right. Where does it matter? Where does it matter more than other times to be right? And, I feel broadly like when I watch other medical shows, when things are wrong that just very easily could be right, but they just like didn't find out, that's troublesome. Like, why be wrong when you can be right? There are times when you must be at least a little bit wrong if we're going to determine right and wrong by like pure factual accuracy, but sort of bringing the actual medicine and then doing something and then having, the rest of the team do something with it that makes it fit the sort of necessities of drama, I think is like at least a part of this role, which is interesting.
Love that. I love that, it is about the details. It's so funny when I'll go to a movie or watch something and it's just totally fantastical. It's living in this world that is not even our world. And something subtle will happen. I'm like, well, that's not realistic, right? And it was just such a detail of how he got his jacket on or something. And I'm like, well, that would never happen. And then it takes you out of the world. So, that really the accuracy or the authenticity of being in that space and in that hospital comes down to those details. You said a little earlier that like one of the questions that you ask yourself and you kind of bring into the room is, what is the truth we're trying to bring to viewers? So every detail isn't important, but ultimately, what is the truth we're trying to bring here? What do you think the truth was in this case with Nick and in this episode?
I think we can each answer. I could take a stab, but I think the truth here is that one truth is that organ donation is an extraordinarily hard thing for people to get their heads around. And organ donation, but organ donation made allowable by brain death. And so brain death itself as a concept, I think is a tremendously complicated concept for somebody to really understand. It's hard for us as physicians at the bedside to sort of see the person as they are and also know this fact that thus allows organ donation. And so I think really trying to step through how that works and to acknowledge the sort of challenge with it for loved ones, and then to show that something beautiful can come of tragedy when you sort of see that diagnosis of brain death and then allow it, have it allow organ donation. I think that was the truth of brain death, which is something that I feel like we had not seen portrayed well. I mean, I'm a real medical TV viewer, and it is so easy to get the words wrong. And those words matter because those are the words that patients and families hear in the hospital. When you say, well, they're brain dead, but we're keeping them alive. Well, no, that can't be true. And like all of this stuff. Yeah. So
I loved you before, and now I just love you so much more, because even in writing in newspaper articles and things, it'd be like they were kept on life support to consider organ donation. It's like, actually they were kept on ventilated support, they were pronounced brain dead. That was, and that matters, because there's such a fear that people won't work as hard to save you, they're not going to work to save your life. And that is, you guys did such an incredible job of really delving into brain death. And I want to reiterate, there is no other episode, no other show, no movie, nothing that has ever done as good a job. And in the details, you included lines like, from the outside, she looks like she's sleeping. The father says, well, she looks okay. And then the doctor's going in and saying, I can't reverse this injury. Nick won't recover from this. Showing the brain scan, showing the images, showing the brain death examination, that the eyes were fixed and dilated, that there was no pain response, disconnecting from the ventilator. And then the father's anger and disbelief that his beautiful daughter, who looks perfectly fine, even explaining why her hand would move, why her heart is beating, all of those things, were a level of detail we had never seen before. We sometimes show get it right and they're like, well, they're brain dead, so let's go to organ donation. But it's like this bink, 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 very fast. You guys did so much all throughout the episode. Could you talk a little bit, Joy, about the decision to go into that level of detail with this episode and with that level of accuracy?
Well, it was a real opportunity to just tell one A story for a whole episode. So that gave us the bandwidth to get into all of these details. I'm not a doctor. When I learned these things in our room, the moments when I felt my mind opening and my jaw dropping and going, what? That's what really happens? Those were signposts to me. This needs to go in the episode. Right? Because when I'm learning something and I've never heard it before, it's like, naturally we make a scene out of that. Daniela got a brain death expert to come and visit our room. Am I going to say his name right? Daniela, Dr. Robert Trogue.
I have talked to this gentleman a number of times. I struggle with his last name. Let's
go with that. Let's go with Dr. Trogue. But he came in and talked through the criteria for brain death. And that was an education that all of us, I think, in the room just latched onto. Like, yeah, I think we were all hit with that realization. This is not what we've seen on television before, right? But this is what doctors face. And it also gave us an opportunity for each of these characters who was so connected to this character who was brain dead to have their own moment, right? To have their own moment of, within my specialty, within my purview, I now know that this person is gone, right? And then I hand it to the next doctor and they can also make that assessment. So in that way, it felt like our character was being cared for by these people who couldn't do anything for her yet, but they weren't going to give up. They weren't going to stop. They were going to exercise every available piece of information that they had to just really look at this and say, this is the finality we're facing. So I came at it from purely the emotion of that and the opportunity to sort of myself kind of wrap my head around, this is what actually happens. And then have, Daniela help me just get through those scenes and make them accurate. It was an opportunity.
Daniela, where did you find the brain death expert? Once you kind of knew that the organ donation, that this was a possibility, and you were like, okay, then we need to know more about how organ donation happens. How did you find this expert to bring in to talk to the writers?
Sure. So I'm an ICU doctor. So like I work in an ICU. I guess I just define that with the same term, but yeah. As such, we do, so it's a medical ICU. So a lot of our patients die from medical issues. So, sepsis, bad cancer. These are not organ donors often. sadly, increasingly, we have seen overdoses. And so we do, of course, have patients who are declared brain dead. So this is something that on the clinical side, like I have walked through. But, as we approach like telling this story, and to Joy's point, like seeing this as an opportunity to do it right, like I wanted to make sure that we talk to somebody who has thought rigorously about, actually has been really involved in like the ethics of brain death and organ donation, and has written largely in medical literature, but like has done some interviews and stuff like this, but really has thought about how this is explained to the public. And so he's a ethicist and professor at the hospital where I work. People reach out to him when there are sort of thorny ethical dilemmas. And so we wanted to talk to somebody who thinks so much about this, to say, all right, we are telling this story. Where should we, what should we make sure to show? What do you wish that TV showed? And I think pretty sure that in that conversation came out that moment that Joy did so beautifully, where Nick's hand moved, and we explained that was a reflex. It was a spinal reflex that did not mean anything volitional. It didn't mean anything about higher brain function. And like, that is something that is so hard for people to see. And will that line change somebody's mind at the bedside in the worst day of their life? I don't know, but I also know that seeing that will be there in the back of somebody's mind as something that, maybe they have heard that before, even if they don't know where.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that he talked about that, because it is, whenever I talk to people, they're like, oh, of course I'm an organ donor. I don't know why anyone wouldn't say yes. I'm like, well, let me tell you about brain death. Because, it is a very, it feels like, you're being told that one thing and seeing another, and that hand movement can be the thing that, where a family has said yes to donation, they see the hand movement and they pull back, because now they think that they're going too fast, that there is some hope, that they can keep praying, those kinds of things. And so again, the detail of just that piece, I mean, I was ecstatic, because that is one of those things where you can't communicate that well. And you did so beautifully, Joy, and just, and it was just a beat. I mean, it was a beat and it was done, but it was so important to the story, I think.
And it was important for us to bring in Nick's family, right? Because any of the doctors seeing that would know. So it was nice to be able to say, this is what it feels like to be a doctor who's connected to the patient, and then to look over here at family who doesn't have the knowledge, and to have that conversation. It was, I still remember filming, like being on set while they were filming that. And it was just probably the most powerful, most gut-wrenching part of the day to get through.
Yeah, I was definitely crying during that. I mean, I was crying throughout, but that scene in particular was really, really powerful. One of the other things that we don't see very often is the role of the organ procurement organization. Usually that's because we have, main characters are in the hospital, and then they're the ones approaching families about organ donation. And so you usually don't see an OPO. And yet it's one of those things that people know there's this nonprofit independent organization that's not affiliated with the hospital or the transplant center, who approaches families about donation, who is the one who can run the registry, is the one who places organs for transplant. That really isn't the physician, and it's definitely not the transplant surgeon. You guys actually created a fictional OPO, which is Nexus Life. And, Dr. Voss noted when she was talking about organ donation and talking about the gift, that she usually doesn't talk to families. Usually that's the role of Nexus Life, but this was a different case because it was Nick. So because you could have easily, just like every other medical drama in human history, avoided the OPO, but you didn't. You created a character, a logo, a name, and really showed the role. What was the thought behind that?
The idea for that was born out of just a very simple thing that Daniela had said in the room, which was like, I don't have these conversations with family. I have a thing that I say, and then I step out of the room. and that person comes in. And I thought, wow, that is so interesting for this episode, because everybody in the hospital is connected to this person in the bed. So how do we represent and honor that there is this other organization that handles it? And all of our doctors know that, and have them just put that out there. That was fun. And that particular scene with Kit and Conrad, it was rewritten a couple of times. I went back and forth. There was a version where Kit comes in and says, essentially, I'm not allowed to say anything to you, so I'm going to step out. She's going to come in and say it. And they're both crying because they know what the subtext is. And then finally, I just landed in a place where I was like, listen, she's the CEO. So maybe she's just going to break a little rule right here and acknowledge it, but we can still use her to introduce this person. And it's that moment that I think if you didn't know that that's the way organ donation was going to happen for your loved one, it might throw you off. Like, wait, you're the doctor. Why are you leaving? Why am I talking to this person? So it felt, again, like another opportunity to just sort of showcase, like, here's a detail that you might not have ever considered, but God forbid you ever end up in this position and you're having to have these conversations. Like, this is how doctors handle it. So yeah, it was really born out of Danielle is just like, as most things in the writer's room are, somebody makes a stray comment and we were all like, wait, what? You don't handle that yourself?
It has always bothered me on these shows that we seem to have doctors are essentially like deciding they're taking an organ from one patient that they care for and putting it in another, like all the time. I mean, that's happened on almost every medical show. And mostly you don't pause on that. But then if you think about it, I mean, trying to avoid things that sow distrust, that's one of them. And so, yeah, I thought, when Joy did that, that really sort of felt, again, yeah, it added to that veracity of like, there are ways we do this thing. We're not just going to like, say, oh, now we're the ones who are in charge of deciding this thing. No, there's boundaries, but also this is a different case. And we all, Conrad knew what was coming. So.
Yeah. And I think it was, I think the end writing was spot on, because I think that it's true that you usually wouldn't approach the family about donation. But that's because research shows that when doctors approach about donation, they're less likely to get consent, because there's not this separation between the diagnosis and definition of brain death and then end of life decisions. And so that's why, there's enough research out there to show, like, when doctors approach about donation, the families are sort of not ready and they get a no. But in this case, it was going to be very different, right? Because Nick was just a completely different character, different patient. So yeah, that's amazing. When in that same scene, when Dr. Voss talks to Conrad about Nick's donation, she says even she can save 8 lives and improve the lives of dozens of others, which she doesn't say through tissue donation, but it's through tissue donation. Usually, because organ donation is so life and death, and somebody is on the waiting list, they're going to die without an organ, and so it's got that ticking clock and it's got all of the drama, and we usually don't see tissue really incorporated or included even in when people are talking about the donation or the impact or the recipients. So why why include that? That was a nice beat, but something
similar. I thought there was just the idea of life or death is one way to look at organ donation. And then there's improving quality of life. And we had a lot of conversations in the room that addressed that. And I'm sure there were versions that I wrote where she did specifically say tissue donation. And then it probably came out because it sounded, kind of out of left field. But I know in my own life and just in talking to friends, people have like interesting feelings about organ donation, like, oh, I'd happily donate anything except my eyes, or so I thought, okay, if we talk about it more than just, the main organs that we all think about it, but just the is bounty a weird word to use? There's just an incredible amount that can be given to other people. And those details, it might strike somebody as like, oh yeah, well, why would I need, skin tissue after the fact or whatever? And it might help people see that this is not just the more science fiction kind of way we've seen it before. But just there are layers and layers of opportunity to help other people and improve their quality of life.
Yeah, I think too, a lot of tissue only donors. So tissue donors do not have to, if you're tissue only, you don't actually have to be brain dead. And that's one of the reasons why there's not a shortage of tissue. If you need a cornea transplant right now, you can get a cornea transplant. If you need an ACL replaced, you can get that. And that's in part because the number of people able to donate those is so much more, and also because it's process and preservation times and other kinds of things, but that's part of it. And I think families who are tissue only families sometimes really just don't get seen for the kind of life healing, like transformational gifts that they're giving, that the organ donors get all the all the glory sort of thing. And so just seeing that, that she's not just an organ donor, she's an organ and tissue donor, and her gift goes beyond that. It was incredible. So from the organ, eye, and tissue donation community, again, just that level of detail, that little beat made all the difference. We have seen some honor walks on some other shows, and this one was really powerful because it incorporated the scenes as she was going by each of the characters. Then you went into a memory of how Nick had touched their lives. And so I thought that, that was just brilliant, right? Like that's a great way to kind of wrap everything up and see the impact of this human on other humans. Were you inspired? There are some families who share their honor walks, their real life honor walks on social media. I think they've been on the news several times. Had you seen those honor walks in real life and had those real life stories? Did that sort of inform your decision to do an honor walk for Nick?
Yeah, we shared a few of those around in the writer's room. And again, coming onto the show brand new, I really leaned on the other writers and said, hey, tell me your favorite Nick memory, because I'm new here, right? So I'm sort of almost like a reporter at this point, just collecting the memories and having that really be the send-off. I also feel like there's a little bit that we were able to say about, we're living in this time where people haven't been able to get together and say goodbye, and we've lost, countless people to this pandemic. So it was important to show that even just a walk down a hallway can land and resonate, in lieu of getting together and having a big group gathering to say goodbye. Like it felt like an appropriate and meaningful way to bid farewell to this person. And so, yeah, the ones that are on YouTube and floating around the internet are just so incredibly moving. And I know other shows have done them before. So we wanted to make ours feel, real and special, and hopefully we accomplished that.
Yeah, you definitely did. I think too, I thought about it. I was like, why so many, like over the last couple of years, we've seen honor walks in a couple of the medical shows. And I was thinking about, obviously it's very powerful, but I also think it's because it's one part of the donation process that OPOs and hospitals sort of let the public see. Right, Daniela, back me up here. I think one of the reasons why people don't know about the donation process and why writers don't know about the donation process is because where were they supposed to know about it, right? It's such a delicate moment. It's such a time of, someone's worst nightmare occurring that we're not going to bring cameras in and make it a whole fanfare. And so you don't ever really see the whole process. But these honor walks have been that moment where sort of OPOs and hospitals and donor families open up just a bit and show this one thing. So it captures that heartfelt piece.
No, I think that entirely makes sense. I think that entirely makes sense. And I think a lot of this was, sort of Joy making visible what is often not visible, and what one would assume and I wondered about this when we were talking about everything is, is it too terrible? Like, is it too terrible to show? And I think that the way that she ended up doing the brain death exam, which is sort of a horrifying thing. And by sort of, I mean, it is a horrifying thing, like, cold calorics, like there are things, there's ways that it becomes so dehumanizing, really, because you're sort of proving that this person is no longer there as a person. But sort of, so I think that is a reason that we don't see those things generally. And I think it's also a reason why it was so powerful that Joy was able to make it something that you could watch. Nobody wanted to turn it off. I mean, and so, yeah, I think that the honor walk, though, is much more easily consumable, right? It's like all the people that you love, like seeing somebody go down a hallway or wherever. But that felt like a sort of natural conclusion because we had seen all of the real stuff up until then as well. So it didn't feel like, sometimes I see that on TV and I'm like, oh, that's the one thing they choose to show. Of course, that didn't feel like that at all here.
No, it really did feel like that culmination, and how this deep tragedy and really, a lot of times people don't understand that with brain death, there is that progression to brain death. So this is hours, days, this is a long time that families are kind of coming to this realization with these different tests being done and different treatments being tried. And then the honor walk then captures so much of that pent up, hope for a different outcome, and yet realization of what is so. There was the music that was it was I Give Up Forever to Touch You, which was just, obviously it was just so beautiful. And then went into Forever Young at the end when the donated organs were going to the waiting recipients. Were you guys are responsible for the music too? Because that was a big part of this episode, was the music.
I give all credit to our music supervisor. I do not script music because you never know how anyone is going to react to a song title. You could set off a whole firestorm. So I left that in their hands, and I was delighted when I saw the cut and Forever Young was in there. And so I give all credit to the music supervisors. They did that.
Yeah, well, they did an amazing job, because I don't think you could have picked, two better songs. And they were kind of back to back too. You had like all of this emotion with the honor walk, and then kind of a different emotion captured. And so obviously like the writing and the scripting of it was so powerful. And then to be joined with these pieces of music that we all sort of know and love too, it just made all the difference.
I had a great editor on this episode too. And so he really nailed, Greg Babor, he really nailed that transition from the heaviness and the sadness and the goodbye to the hope. And so that all of that, how it felt seamless, that happened after we had all said cut on the last scene and went home.
I love that. I'm writing that down. From the heaviness to the hope, right? That sort of encapsulates the organ donation process, from the heaviness to the hope, and hoping to, I know as OPOs, Donate Life Hollywood is a project of OneLegacy, which is the organ procurement organization here in Los Angeles. And I worked for years for the OPO. And so, I know every day that's what drives people at the OPOs, is that we know these are patients who are going to die, and we're providing one opportunity of hope, of something good that can come out of a tragedy. And that's what really keeps OPO professionals engaged and connected to the work, is knowing that, or hoping that they can bring people from that heaviness, deep heaviness, to some semblance of hope. So yeah, anyway, again, amazing. The other thing we don't see, basically, it was just a whole episode of firsts for us in the organ donation community. We don't see all the time, is then you've been hit with this incredibly powerful story. You're all like, oh my God, organ donation, amazing, Nick. And then there's this clear call to action at the end. Just bam, right there for you. Be a hero, sign up at organdonor.gov. So whose idea was it to end with that end slate and that call to action?
I loved seeing that landed with people who were tweeting the night that the episode aired. I was like, oh, that's what you hope, right? Is that people pay attention to that. So I'm going to give all credit to the studio network on that one, because they read the draft and immediately contacted me and the director and said, how do you guys feel about a slate at the end? And we were like, yes, of course. That's wonderful. Let's do that. It was great. It was really great seeing people tweeting and saying, oh, I should sign up. Oh, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to do that now. We even had somebody in the writer's room who just had their driver's license renewed, and they were like, and now I'm an organ donor for the first time. So, that's, I credit the studio network because they know that they have that audience and they had the time to add that onto the end. So, yeah.
I am going to contact the folks at organdonor.gov, and I am going to see what level of uptick we saw in the website and report back to you guys.
That would be awesome. I would love to.
I think the writers and the network would love that kind of data point. And I think it also is just a real model for others to show that you can save lives with these inspiring storylines, and that when you have someone, you move them through this emotional state, and then do that call to action, that people are ready to make that action happen.
I'd love to see those numbers, because I feel like that would be the real, testament. We do lots of issues on The Resident.
Yes, you
do. So there are opportunities.
Yeah, you do. You take on all kinds of issues. So, okay, good. So for you guys, are you registered donors? Joy, are you a registered organ donor?
There's my pink dot.
Nice.
From my first license.
Was it from your first license?
Yeah, from the time I got my very first driver's license, I was like, well, yeah, I don't know, just kind of, no brainer. Just, yeah, of course I am.
Was your mom an organ donor? I have a theory on this. Was your mom a donor?
I don't know. And I didn't discuss it with my parents. It was just a thing that I thought, well, yeah, if anything happens to me, like, I'm not taking anything to the next place. So yeah.
That's awesome. Daniela?
Ditto, yes. But, I think I get people being like, I don't want, it's so hard to think about these things. And I understand that. I remember, I don't think it was my first license, at some license, you're an organ donor, you're still going to be an organ donor. Yes, of course. And then you have this moment of pause, not about being an organ donor, but about, being reminded of the potential for devastation in anybody's lives at any point. But I think that this story showed that happens, and that donation itself is a way to make it mean something. So
the number one reason, can you guys guess this? The number one reason in the hospital, like if the person is not registered as a donor, and so it's a family consent, we're approaching about donation. Number one reason why families say no to donation?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think it's religious.
It's because they don't know. They don't know what their loved one wanted. And so
okay, of course.
They err on the side of saying no sometimes. Interesting thing, women are more likely to consent, or so a wife is more likely to consent for her husband, or a mother for her son, than a husband for their wife. Men don't consent at higher rates as women. Men do not register at as high rates of women, and women are more of the living donors all across America. So just
interesting.
Very interesting.
Just little women saving lives all across the country.
I love it. I love that.
No, exactly. Yes, and it is true that even if you register as a donor, it's so important to have that conversation with your family as well, so they know your loved one's wishes, because it is hard when we have a registered donor. We look into the registry, bring that information to the next of kin, and they're like, "What? I didn't know this," and that can be, difficult for families, obviously. Well,
That's
great.
interesting. And I have I'm a mom, I have 4 kids, and they don't watch a lot of the shows that I have written because Outlander is not exactly family time. But I did have them watch this episode, and they were sad the whole way through. Oh my gosh, did you really do this, Mom? Why would you write this? And then at the end, the final shot where her heart is going off in the helicopter, they were like, this is great. So I feel like I've sort of sown the seed to have this conversation with my kids, when they're a little bit older.
Wow. Well, I will tell you that when we go out and we do high school presentations about organ donation, which OPOs do all over the country, there's actual legislation that is incorporated into some curriculum in some states, but talking to kids before they get their driver's license, just to get them information about organ donation. But when the kids have issues, it's usually, well, I saw on Grey's Anatomy, I saw on this, I saw on that. And so now I'm going to go back and really make the pitch to all of our youth education team all across the country that if they get any of this, I saw this, that you say, okay, well, I want you tonight as homework to go and watch The Resident.
Nice. I like being homework. That's a good one.
Episode 503, right? Episode 503. That is your homework tonight. And then email me with any questions. But there's so much misinformation they get from television or perceptions. And I think one of the big ones is that remains is they won't work as hard to save you. And so you definitely showed how hard the medical team was working to save the patient all throughout. You weren't actively trying to debunk that myth for us, were you? It wasn't a conscious move.
No, I mean, Daniela Daniela was my source for all that. It's like, okay, what really happens? And she's, you can speak to this, Daniela. You're there every day.
I know, that's a good point. It actually, because it is so much of, it's like a fear that people have, but it is so not even in our heads when we're taking care of people, that it wasn't even in my head. It was like, of course we will try to do everything until it is clear that there is nothing that a human can do to make the situation better. So no, I don't think that was a conscious choice, but I think the fact that we didn't even think about it reflects the reality in the hospital that it is so sad that people fear that, because it is not there at all. Like, I mean, do I even know which of my patients are organ donors? No, you don't know until it's an actual question, until you actually have to know. You don't know that information about your patients when you're trying to make them better. So.
The other thing that a patient has to be in a hospital, they have to be ventilated, they have to have stabilized blood pressure. And those are all the things you're going to do to try and save someone's life. So, even as Nick was coming in, and it looked kind of like iffy if she was even going to survive the transport of this, from even that point, showing that actually for organ donation to even be considered, you have to do everything possible to get that patient to keep their heart beating, to have them on the ventilator, all of those kinds of things. So, to see all of that in action was really, really powerful. And yes, it was Nick, but you didn't get the sense that they were doing this just because it was Nick. You got the sense that they were doing this because they even referenced another case. Well, in this case, we were able to do this. And the guy was like, yeah, that was a different kind of thing. But that just for the random person, they're going to be trying everything they can to decrease that head trauma and the swelling and all of those kinds of things. So really just amazing. Frank is in the Q&A. He said that what he feels is the number one response for not registering is I'm too old. I'm too old to donate, which is interesting, that people kind of just rule themselves out. So it is an interesting thing with organ donation that it's so rare, as we talked about earlier, but also that everyone can register. right? Like that you shouldn't rule yourself out. Doesn't matter what medical condition you have, go ahead and register. And then at the end, that's when, the criteria will be considered. So it's this thing where it's like a huge funnel where everyone can be a part of it. But then at the end, it's really because of the head trauma that makes it so rare. A couple of people also saying that talking about the music and how great it was. If anyone else has I truly loved and enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully this episode will begin the need to make more episodes about organ donation. And Frank noted that up to 75 people can be healed or helped with tissue donation. Frank thanks us for this conversation. You did learn a lot of things, Joy, about organ donation. There's many of them, but can you think of one that you kind of incorporated where it was that aha moment of like, wow, okay. You had said when he came in and talked. So one of those things where you're like, didn't know that.
I didn't know so much going into this, and the brain death exam itself was really eye-opening to me. Also, the idea of what kind of condition you have to be in. In other words, if you don't know this stuff, you might just think, oh, the minute anybody dies, then people are in there taking whatever they want. It's not at all what happens. Like the rareness and the specialness of the circumstances really blew my mind and really made me personally think, well, like this funnel you're talking about, everybody should sign up because you don't know what's going to happen. And if it happens to be that circumstance, what an amazing, new chapter. Parts of you will help other people live. So that was really like eye-opening to me. Yeah.
I think too, you guys did take on the hardest part. I think a lot of shows they talk about the recipient side of things. We see storylines about the recipients pretty regularly and getting better, where they're on a waiting list and they're calling UNOS and things like that. But was there any pushback when you were going into all of this detail and that it was going to be too dark for people?
Yes. It's interesting. There was a tiny little storyline that was happening concurrent with all of this that was in the ER about a guy who we referred to as a frequent flyer patient who was just there to irritate everybody while they were having this very personal tragedy happening upstairs. And we added it in just to have some moments to breathe. And then we watched the cut and we were like, take that all out. Like, that can't stay in here. Because, when you look at the episode, it kind of feels like sort of the natural progression. It's like the shock, the fear, the reality hits. Oh gosh, it's over. And then you have to sort of have this uplifting moment. So in our effort to sort of lighten it and make sure we didn't have too heavy of an episode, we shot some stuff that's never going to see the light of day. So we struck the balance. Somehow we struck the bittersweet, heartbreaking balance of just staying on this one story.
You did have the long haul COVID patient though. And I thought that was really powerful because, obviously they had no Nick. And so we're sort of emotionally invested. But the wife, when Conrad was like, don't let him give up, right? Because he was facing something that he couldn't make a choice about. And so it did make an interesting and a nice compliment to have that B story in there. But yeah. I could see how something lighthearted or funny or kind of,
Right. I loved the actors too, who were in the long haul COVID story. And that was, again, like the show has jumped in time and they sort of handled COVID very well last season with just like, we're going to do this and then we're going to jump time and say it's behind us. And now obviously we're all living in the reality of knowing like, how far behind us is this ever going to feel? So it was nice to be able to sort of talk about long haul COVID and also give this couple who are older, right? this new shot, Daniela and I talked a lot about that trachea transplant, because the reality is it's not something that's common. It's not done very easily. And so that was a place where we took some liberties and just sort of said, here we go, they're a match, all of that, just like suspend disbelief on the side. But we wanted to just show like one person on the receiving end right at the end.
No, I thought that was amazing too, because most of the organs didn't go to the patient down the hall, Daniela, like you were saying. Like in every other show, it's like it's like they're on the same floor and it's just going. And the transplant recipients, as I mentioned, and donor families, when they watch medical shows, are usually just, they're throwing things at the television. They can't stand it. They pull their hair out. But I thought this was so great because you were invested in this couple and you didn't see it coming. That was the great thing. You didn't see how the solution or how those two storylines were going to intersect, which usually you're like, oh, the guy needs a liver and this person had a car accident. Okay, I guess that person's going to give to that person. And that just came out of the blue, and it was so lovely. And so it felt like that emotional breathing room, because if you didn't know any of the people she was going to save, I don't know, it might not have had as much resonance as it did. So Daniela, what were your thoughts about that trachea?
I mean, initially I was difficult about it, I think, but it shows the limitations of a medical person. I mean, it didn't we had a conversation about it, but also I like it in the, I think my worry was that, I guess it gets to like our question, a little discussion before this started, which is where does it matter to be accurate? And I had a worry, like we were so accurate with the brain death exam. Would it undercut us at all by then sort of speeding the process on the actual donation side? Clearly didn't. And I don't think in watching it doesn't, because you want to know that you made somebody better. You want to know that this decision, though in real life, generally, the decision, it just, that then helps countless anonymous people who you might never know. In this setting, like they had made such a fraught decision, and I understand that we wanted to see somebody get better. And I love the point that Joy made earlier, which is that that sort of also telling a story that complicates that sort of life or death dichotomy of, the only thing that matters is if you're alive or dead. That's not true. And so showing a story where we actually improved somebody's quality of life, I felt like was a really cool choice on her part, and gave that story sort of an extra bit of resonance.
Yeah, it wasn't just that, the heart and again, you didn't see it coming that the trachea would be the solution. You thought that this was just going to be a really hard, that he didn't have any choices left. And that Nick kind of opened up a new world and a new life for them. Are there other things, Daniela, that as a physician, when you watch medical shows, that do you throw things at the screen about are there certain things that really bug you?
I mean, throwing things, I would get in trouble for breaking the TV, but I don't know. I mean, the organ donation stuff of sort of the way that we tell those stories are often told, and particularly the physician being in charge of determining where things go, which is not what we did. That does bother me. I mean, I can't think necessarily offhand. I think there's a lot that doesn't matter. I think that things like speeding time that used to bother me before I was in a writer's room, the lab would never come back that quickly. Who cares? If we showed things how they are, people would be rounding all day, refreshing the computer, waiting for labs. And then they would say things at the end of the day, like, oh, let's just check again tomorrow. Like, I hope it gets better. And maybe write for a medicine. But nobody would watch. So I've given myself in my head, more leeway on those things. Things that, I do wish, to a point you had made earlier, I do wish and I think that we do this some on The Resident, but that we could show more the fact that outcomes are uncertain, the fact that like you don't just wake up after the surgery, because I think that's probably one of the areas where things matter. There's been like big New England Journal study actually comparing cardiac arrests in television to cardiac arrests resuscitation in real life. It was back in the 90s. The authors like watched a ton of ER and some rescue 911. And, they found that about 75% of these people on TV survived with like great neurologic outcome and nobody died afterwards. And compared to like really slim outcomes in real life. And I think The Resident's done a good job of that. Actually, we do show failed resuscitation. We do show resuscitation that doesn't get you where you want to be, that just, having that heart beating doesn't mean that things are okay. And so I think we do a good job of those things. I think those things are what matters. And then there's a lot of details around the edges that you can sort of glide over to allow for drama and to allow the real truths to be told. But I'm still trying to figure out that balance myself.
I said to one of my friends who's a writer, with Donate Life Hollywood, I'm like, yes, our goal is to see accurate storylines about organ donation. And she's like, okay. She's like, good luck with that, because that's not my goal as a writer. My goal as a writer is authenticity and telling an authentic story, but true, deep accuracy. And it was funny because I've been doing this a while and it just hit me and I was like, oh, right, that's my goal, authentic stories about organ donation. And I think, you guys were able to weave something that was deeply authentic with elements of accuracy that we hadn't seen before. Joy, do you bring to all of your writing this level of kind of detail, or was this something that was a little bit different, the level of detail that you were going into here?
It was definitely different. I mean, I try to always write to the details that capture my attention and my imagination when I feel like I'm hearing something that I've never heard before. That's usually where I lean in a little bit harder for my writing and try to get that right, because it's possible that if I don't know it, somebody else might not know it. And so with this episode, that was really, I had that in spades. It was like every corner I looked in was new information. And I found on this show more than other shows, that is the case. I mean, I've worked, on some of the other shows I've worked on, Ghost Whisperer, for instance, she was married to a paramedic. We would do medical stories. And if I showed them to Daniela today, her head would explode because there was not a moment that we spent trying to make any of it real, because it was a ghost show. So I'm enjoying my process on The Resident a lot for that reason. And because now I have all these fantastic doctor writers. Danielle is super modest, but she is an exceptional writer and will also be Zooming with us in the writer's room from the ICU, knowing that there are patients who also need her. It's incredible. So I feel like
when you say it that way, but yes.
Yeah, she's like, hold on just a sec. I gotta talk to my writer friends. No, but it's incredible for me. I feel like I'm learning so much. So I'm just having a blast on this show.
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to let you guys know that you will, both of you, because of your participation in this, be winning a Donate Life Hollywood Inspire Award that we'll give you in 2022, which we give to television shows that have an authentic, and in this case, deeply accurate message about organ, eye, and tissue donation. And so, just really, I'm gonna start crying on this one, but I don't think that you guys really understand how impactful and how grateful we in the donation community are to see this kind of donor story and the level of brain death and all the things that you guys have done. It's hard to see your cause on television sometimes, because that when people are getting this information, it could be costing real people's lives, that 17 people die every day waiting. And when people are scared to donate because of what they see on television, that it's just, and that's preventable. And what you guys have done is really, I just want you guys to know you've saved lives here. So thank you.
So gratifying to hear that. And I'm just so like, I'm so proud that you're saying this, and it was just lovely to be here and be able to talk to you, and really like, we've traded emails, but now I'm like, now I know your face and I have this sense of your cause, and like I can't wait to sing your praises everywhere.
Good.
Well, honored to be a part of that. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for bringing me in. Thanks.
Yes, Daniela, thank you so much. We're at 1 o'clock. I will get to see both of you at the DLH Inspire Awards next year, and we'll get you all that information. And just thank you so much for your storytelling, for your authenticity, and for your time today. Bye, guys.